Week 5 is in the books, and that means it's time to hit those Dynasty waiver wires and see if there are any players available in your Dynasty leagues that could help your roster or your actual starting lineup. So let's get right into the video. As I say every week, I pull actual rosters and actual data from real Dynasty leagues run through my fantasy league on safeleagues.com, which helps guide me to find players that might actually be available to you guys in your Dynasty leagues. And then I pull apart a few of those guys every single week. First, I want to give you guys a few names just to double check to see if they're on your waiver wire, because they are highly rostered in the Dynasty leagues that I am pulling from, but they are not at 100% rostership, and they could be available in your league. They may not be, they probably aren't, but just double check just to be sure that these guys are not on your Dynasty waiver wire. And that includes Cordero Patterson, running back for the Atlanta Falcons. Call me crazy, he's still available in 5% of the Dynasty leagues that I am pulling from, which is actually insane given Cordero Patterson's recent production over the last few weeks. So if you're one of those leagues, just double check to make sure Cordero Patterson is not on your Dynasty waiver wire. Other guys include Alex Collins, running back for the Seattle Seahawks, Darrell Williams, running back for the Kansas City Chiefs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver for the Detroit Lions, and Dan Arnold, tight end for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So let's kick things off with perhaps the biggest waiver wire ad of the week, specifically in those Dynasty Superflex leagues, and that is Geno Smith, quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks, who is now the incumbent and the replacement for Russell Wilson after he had surgery on his hand that is going to put him out for at least a month, if not longer. So insert Geno Smith here, who now comes in as the starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. I think he could actually bring a viable QB2 or replacement starter, a spot starter, specifically if you lost Russell Wilson, or as bye weeks are going to start kicking off here in this week in week 6, you know, he could definitely be a viable QB2 and a spot start on a bye week if you really need a guy to get you 15, maybe 20 points just in your super flex spot that you might not have available to you from the rest of your roster, especially because of bye weeks. And it's not like Geno did terrible in the time that he spent replacing Russell Wilson in this game. I mean, in just under half of the game, he threw for 131 yards and a touchdown while also adding an additional 23 yards rushing. So he offers that solid rushing floor that we'd like to see for fantasy because he is a mobile quarterback. So if he can get you, 30 to 40 yards, that's just 4 additional baseline points that you're getting. Maybe he throws for 200, 250 yards or something like that. 1 or 2 touchdowns. That's a pretty solid spot start at the quarterback position. And of course, there are definitely other offenses where a backup quarterback would have a much worse time for fantasy football. But the Seattle Seahawks offense, with Tyler Lockett, with DK Metcalf, there are definitely worse opportunities and teams for a backup quarterback to come in and immediately provide fantasy value for us than what Geno Smith has with the Seattle Seahawks. So if you can go about and add him, even if you're not the Russell Wilson manager who just lost Russell Wilson, but specifically if you are the Russell Wilson manager, you need to be attacking Geno Smith because he is only rostered in 1% of the Dynasty leagues that I'm looking at, and the majority of these are super flex leagues. So that's really telling the fact that he is almost widely available, even in your super flex leagues, that Geno Smith is probably on your waiver wire. So everybody should have a waiver wire ad this week, or at least some sort of request in there for Fab. In one quarterback, it's probably a little different. You probably don't really need to go out and grab Geno Smith, especially if you have 2 or 3 other quarterbacks. Even if you are the guy that lost Russell Wilson, you can stream that quarterback position on a weekly basis, and you might not need to add Geno. But in those Dynasty Superflex leagues, he's going to be very important, I think, over the next month with bye weeks and potential other quarterback injuries like the slew of injuries that we just saw just this week that could continue, and rostering a guy like Geno Smith is definitely not the worst way to go about it in Superflex leagues. The other big time waiver wire pickup this week is Devontae Booker, running back for the New York Giants, who is now the backup and starting running back for the Giants after Saquon Barkley had what is now being described and being diagnosed as a low-grade ankle sprain that is putting him on a week-to-week basis. I've seen anywhere from he could be out just this week and returns in 2 weeks. I could see him being out for, the remainder of October. It's a very wide and variable timeline for Saquon Barkley and his return to the NFL field. And any amount of games that Saquon misses and Devontae Booker is the guy is going to be super helpful for us for fantasy football. And we saw that he got the workhorse workload with Saquon Barkley out. I mean, he had 16 carries, he had 4 targets, so 20 total opportunities. He wasn't all that efficient, only 58 total yards on 19 touches on those 20 opportunities, but he did end up scoring twice, even though one of those was basically a garbage time end of game touchdown. He did find the end zone twice. So there is that opportunity, and the volume that Devontae Booker got and is, I think, pretty easily projectable for him to get without Saquon Barkley on the field. And of course, I mean, there's all those other external factors, like how bad is the Daniel Jones injury? Is he going to be the starter, or is it Mike Glennon? You know, Kenny Golladay also got hurt. Sterling Shepard's coming back from injury. Kadarius Toney got ejected, and I saw that he had some like x-rays or something that might be on his hand for the punch. I don't know. But there's a lot of injury and badness and suckiness going on with this New York Giants team that it might be hard to trust Devontae Booker. You know, the old running back on a really bad team for fantasy football is not that good. And let's not forget that Wayne Gallman last year on this same exact team, without Kenny Golladay, without Saquon Barkley, with a really, really bad Daniel Jones, was a top 10 running back for the stretch of weeks that he was in. Basically over a 4 or 5 game sample, he was an RB1 over that entire month last year. So if Wayne Gallman, I think, can do it, I think Devontae Booker can do it, and he just has the volume to support that, and I think he can just definitely be a very viable flex play for a lot of people out there that could be available on your waiver wires, currently available in over 40% of the Dynasty leagues that I am looking at. So between Devontae Booker and Geno Smith, the probability that at least one of those guys is on your waiver wire is really high in my opinion, and everybody should have a waiver wire request going in today on Tuesday for Wednesday waivers. The other guy I want to mention is Brandon Bolden, running back for the New England Patriots. He's actually rostered in more leagues than Devontae Booker, so he might not be available in yours, but still available in almost 30% of the Dynasty leagues that I'm pulling from. And it seems like he is the primary backup and new replacement for James White. He's getting the receiving workload. He's getting the targets. He has 10 targets over the last 2 weeks, which is pretty solid, pretty fine. He's going to be pretty variable on a week-to-week basis. He's basically in that tier of other primary pass catchers where that's basically their entire production and fantasy value is through the pass catching game. Guys like Naeem Hines, JD McKissick, you can throw Giovanni Bernard in there as well. He's kind of in that type of tier. So if you want a player like that, I think Brandon Bolden, who could be available on your waiver wire, is a pretty solid add to just have another guy in that mix, maybe as a spot starter for bye weeks or for injuries or anything like that, who could get you, 10 to 15 fantasy points on a pretty solid game just because he has 4 or 5 receptions any given week. So Brandon Bolden, I think, is another pretty solid waiver wire add at the running back position if you need that production. The last player I really want to emphasize this week is Rickey Seals-Jones, tight end for the Washington football team. And I probably should have thrown him in last week because, he was widely available last week, and some of the really, really smart dynasty managers saw the workload and potential opportunities that Rickey Seals-Jones had last week, although they were primarily just in the form of routes run. He didn't really have the targets or production last week. That opportunity still was there based on his routes and his snaps and his overall utilization on the team without receiving those targets. However, all of that stuff turned into pretty solid targets and production this week to the tune of 8 targets, 5 receptions for 41 yards, which is a solid day for tight ends who don't find the end zone, is that 9.1 fantasy points in a PPR league. So what we're seeing from Seals-Jones is that he has basically become the de facto replacement, the one-to-one replacement in Washington's offense for Logan Thomas, who was placed on IR before this past week. So he's guaranteed to be out for at least the next 2 weeks, if not potentially after that, because their bye week is in 3 weeks. So maybe they hold him and then they wait for him to come back after their bye week just to be 100% healthy. That could be opportunity that Rickey Seals-Jones is seeing at the tight end position. That could be really important to your team, especially because I've said this a few times in this video, as bye weeks start rolling up. I mean, even at the tight end position, bye weeks are really going to kill you because there's only a handful of those guys that you can start every single week. And as bye weeks kick in this week, we have bye weeks going for Kyle Pitts, Dawson Knox, Dalton Schultz, and Dan Arnold this week and next week. And if Thomas is out in week 8, then we can also include Mark Andrews and Darren Waller as all these tight ends who are on bye weeks over the next 3 weeks that you could be playing Rickey Seals-Jones in their favor for, just picking them up right off of the waiver wire and be able to insert them on their bye weeks. Seals-Jones is pretty widely available, just like Devontae Booker. He's actually rostered in 57% of Dynasty leagues, so a little over 40% available in a lot of your Dynasty leagues right now, even after last week. Rickey Seals-Jones, big-time player and big-time ad. So between honestly, Rickey Seals-Jones, Devontae Booker, and Geno Smith, all three of those guys are big time waiver wire ads that you guys need to have requests in for this week. And I would not be opposed to spending a decent chunk of fab change for any of those three guys if you really, really need them, because the season is going to continue to roll on and your fab is going to become less and less important every single week as we move through the remainder of the season. So if you really, really need one of those guys, don't hesitate to spend some serious fab on these guys. If you need to buy a win, you need to buy a spot start, do all of that with your fab. That's just my personal take on it, because I'm very aggressive with my fab whenever I see somebody that I think could be a really important key piece to my offense and my starting lineup, even for just 1 week. Just like I said, to just buy that win, spend that fab to get some of these guys, especially these guys who have potential longer term value over the next few weeks into November. That could be really, really important for your starting lineup. So spend that fab, and then don't be afraid to drop some other guys who just aren't doing anything for you. Or maybe you've taken some of my advice previously on some of other wide receivers, like I mentioned, like Nick Westbrook or Kendrick Bourne, or just all these guys that are just chilling on the back end of your roster, not really doing much. You can't really see yourself putting them in your starting lineup. Churn out that back end of your roster. Don't be afraid to drop players like that at the back end of your roster for players that could actually see your starting lineup. I mean, if you've been holding on to like OJ Howard, Cameron Brate, Dwayne Eskridge, Denzel Mims, like don't hold on to those players when you have actual players that you can pick up off of the waiver wire that could actually do something for you. Just continue to churn out that back end of your roster, and that will be really helpful for you in the long run, especially as we start getting into bye weeks and then eventually the fantasy playoffs. As I mentioned every single week, I also still write a Dynasty waiver wire article for dynastyleaguefootball.com that you can find every single Monday. That also includes additional players than what I mentioned in this video. So if you want access to this waiver wire video with more players a day earlier, you can sign up for a DLF Premium subscription and gain access to that article on top of all of the other amazing articles that we're dropping on DLF every single week by the amazing DLF writing team. You also get access to rankings, ADP, tools, resources, trade analyzer, the trade finder, all of that important stuff for the remainder of the season that you need to have access to in order to help win you guys some Dynasty championships. That's what we're here for. That's what we want to do. And with a DLF Premium subscription, I think that that could really help you guys a lot in that way to win some Dynasty championships. And if you would like to watch a video that includes more of a Dynasty recap for the entire week 5 week, then you can click right up on here and watch that video. And with that all being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching, and we will catch y'all later.